This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
It became very clear to me that Justin Trudeau is too beholden to corporate interests to go further, unwilling to stop big corporations that are ripping off Canadians. And so I've ripped up the supply and confidence agreement with Justin Trudeau. And we know that that makes the election timing more uncertain and, frankly, more likely.
They say that breaking up is hard to do, but Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau recently did that. A second big breakup for Justin in just over 2 years. It's going to be difficult for him, but his government will survive for now. The biggest thing that happens out of all of this is uncertainty. Now, to try and put a bit of context on all of this, we reached out to Karl Bélanger. Hello, welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host, and Karl Bélanger is someone who has worked in and around federal politics for decades now, and someone who was at the inner circle for Jack Layton and Tom Mulcair while they were NDP leaders. Karl, what did you make of this when you heard the news that the deal was off? Were you shocked?
I was surprised. Certainly, I was surprised at the timing. You always knew that at some point the NDP was going to try to create some distance from their Liberal allies because they don't want to be sinking with the ship. And that ship has been sinking for quite some time now. So you were wondering, when is it going to be over? And we heard that Jagmeet Singh decided to break up with Justin by sending him a little text at the last minute, saying, "Hey, we're done here."
Yeah, it's not even a very dignified way to break up. You release a video. Oh, and first off, Brian Lilly of the Toronto Sun is the guy who breaks it online, somehow getting the internal NDP caucus emails. And I learned by watching CBC that I was out there with the news before they'd even officially informed the PMO. So before Trudeau's office was officially notified, I made it public.
And I tried to get confirmation all morning, as I heard the rumor, to break it on my own radio network with Cogeco Media. And I couldn't. Nobody would get back to me. They didn't want to confirm anything. So it goes to show that they like you now more than they like me, Brian.
Well, okay. So you were in the inner circle. You're not now. But what insight can you take me through in terms of how this decision happened? You know, I've talked to people who were much more chatty after the announcement happened than before, because you, I was bugging people and being very tight-lipped, and then somebody wasn't, and you know, the news got out there a little bit earlier. But my understanding is caucus has been talking about this since the House rose, that this was decided before the rail strike, even the binding arbitration was put through, that they'd made the decision and shot the video more than 2 weeks ago.
So this tells me that it was not a principled decision. It was not based on the agreement not fulfilling its promises. It was not based on any kind of crisis that was happening or any kind of big rift between the Liberals and the New Democrats. It's a pure political calculation decision. And so what the New Democrats want to do now is to use the next number of months, try to create some distance and establish themselves as an opposition party, as opposed to a party that's propping up the Liberals over and over. Will they be able to do that? Well, we'll see. Because when we heard Jagmeet Singh's press conference, he was asked many times, including by you, about his confidence in the Trudeau government, and we could not really get an answer on that.
Okay, so since you brought it up, I want to play a quick clip here. I had already asked him once, and I wasn't the first reporter, but I just put it very plainly. My question was, do you have confidence in the Trudeau government? And he talked about a lot of things, including how he is the guy who will fight Pierre Poilievre. And then I went to him again and asked him 5 times. And here's that exchange.
You've said about a dozen times at least that you've ripped up the agreement and that makes an election more likely. But you've been asked several times and you won't answer. Do you have confidence in the Trudeau government as they stand now?
I will be clear again. We have absolutely ripped up the agreement with Justin Trudeau, and that means an election is more likely.
Clear. That's not clear. You're equivocating.
And an election, whenever that election comes, we'll be ready to fight it. And the vision around that election is going to be an important one. Canadians will have to make a choice.
But can we get an answer?
Corporate-controlled Conservatives, they're going to let their corporate buddies rip you off even more, or New Democrats are going to save you money on your rent and your groceries. That's a choice that Canadians will have to make.
Can we get an answer?
I will look at any vote that comes before us, and we will make a decision in the best interest of Canadians, as any minority government normally operates.
Okay, so Karl, you're the former comms guy. You worked with Jack Layton and Tom Mulcair. You still advise through your company, Traction Strategies. You still advise people on communications. What's the comm strategy of not answering that question more than a dozen times when you know that that's coming? Because I don't think Jagmeet's press conference went quite the way they'd hoped it would.
No, and they tried to control the press conference as much as they could, but at the end of the day, you could see that there was a very fine line that Jagmeet Singh was trying to walk on about the confidence into the Trudeau government. Because when you push the decision to its logic, conclusion is you have lost confidence in your partner.
Well, the agreement was called supply and
confidence. Exactly. And so he doesn't want to say if he has confidence or not in the Trudeau government. Frankly, there's a couple of things at play, but I think the Democrats here are at risk of Ignatieff themselves.
Okay,
right?
So I heard you use that phrase on TV the other day. You're the only person that's made the comparison, and I think it's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Explain what that is, to Ignatieff yourself.
So Michael Ignatieff, when he was leader of the Liberal Party, had a big press conference where he announced to Stephen Harper, Mr. Harper, your time is up. And then he was laying the stage for an election that was happening soon. Sadly, when the time came for the Liberals to bring down the government, confidence vote after confidence votes after confidence vote, the Liberals kept Stephen Harper in power time and time again. So even though he was grandstanding about bringing down the government, he was not able to pull the trigger. And when the opportunity arose for him to do so, he was not doing it. So basically, you were keeping Harper in power. And this is what could happen to Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, because you will have a series of confidence votes, some triggered by the opposition, some triggered by the government. The budget comes to mind, of course.
The fall economic statement, I expect sometime in November.
Yeah, so there will be a series of votes, and you will be forced to make a decision based on that. Now, if every single time the NDP is the party that's propping up the Liberals without getting anything in return, well, you will get all the negative of being associated with the government, and none of the positive that they had with the supply and confidence agreement, namely all the public policies they were able to push forward. That's the big downside for Jagmeet Singh. And this is where I think the New Democrats are hoping that somehow the Bloc Québécois will come to the table and become a dance partner for the Liberals to kind of allow them to vote against the Liberal government and to create that distance with them. That's what they're hoping for anyway.
Okay, so I want to ask you a few things about the agreement. Did the NDP win or lose from it? But since you brought up the Bloc, Yves-François Blanchet was on Mario Dumont show on TVA and was saying, no, we're not going to vote for the Liberals.
Yeah, well, they're not going to vote for the Liberals per se, but if they are able to use that newfound balance of power that they have to make some gains for Quebec, they will. If they are able to put pressure to allow the federal government to make concessions to the Quebec government on key issues, healthcare financing, housing, immigration comes to mind.
Immigration huge in Quebec.
It's huge. It's a huge irritant between the two governments. And so you could see the Bloc Québécois say, well, we don't necessarily have confidence in this government, but this particular thing is a gain for Quebec. This is why the Bloc Québécois is in Ottawa, and this is why Quebecers should continue to vote for the Bloc Québécois. It's a great a message for the Bloc because, frankly, ever since the agreement came in place, there was not a lot of thunder for the Bloc Québécois. You did not really hear from them. They were not really a player because you had the main opposition in the Conservatives, and you had the NDP who was using that balance of power to make some gains and campaign on it. So the Bloc Québécois was kind of in a limbo, not doing much. Now they have a newfound raison d'être, and I think they will use it to good effect.
So the Bloc will vote for the government if they can get something.
Oh yeah, because
did the NDP get much though from this agreement? And let me give you my view on it. There's the dental care program, but it's not what New Democrats wanted. There's the pharmacare program, and it's not what New Democrats wanted. In fact, I would argue that on both of those, the government put forward the bare minimum, the least that they could to continue the agreement. And yeah, they're just hoping that goes along. Is that good enough? I mean, I know Singh came out with his announcement the other day and said this agreement was so good for Canadians because we got so much done, but now they're the worst government ever and we have to break up with them. Did they actually achieve what they wanted, or did they just get token little gifts?
It's a very good question, and certainly I think one of the reasons why I was surprised that they pulled the plug on the deal, because they could have bonified these programs. They could have kept working to improve these programs, to add more drugs to the pharmacare plan, to expand services on the dental care program. And so they are not going to be able to do that now. And more to the point, these programs are not established well enough to make the Conservatives think twice about removing them and dropping them once they're in power. So we are one step closer for all these achievements that the NDP has made over the past few years to disappear if an election happens and Pierre Poilievre becomes prime minister. So it makes it very peculiar that the NDP would walk away from all of that after all this time that they've spent propping up the Liberals. And so I think at the basis of the problem is the way that this deal was negotiated and the wording in some of this deal that allowed the Liberals to keep going and the NDP to keep voting for them. There was a lot of, aspirational language, right? We are working towards establishing this, establishing that. And
the Liberals are very good at aspirational language as opposed to delivering.
Right.
Deliverology was a thing.
Is that still a thing?
But it's not anymore.
It disappeared, right? And so for the NDP, the goal was to have some kind of a governance record, right? You achieve all these things, you push for all these things, and then you have it in your record, and you can campaign on it and say, you like these things we've worked on with the Liberals. They are the bare minimum. They're kind of window dressing. Just imagine how much better Canada could be if NDP was in power to establish fully these programs. But they have not been able to get credit for that. Certainly in the polls, they have not been able to make any gain. If anything, they've been stalled around the 20% bar for quite some time. And sadly for them, while their Liberal ally has been dropping in the polls, the one party that benefited is the Conservative Party, not the NDP. So,
well, I was pointing that out. I did a column a week or two before saying Jagmeet Singh is the boy who's cried wolf, because I didn't believe him on the rail strike that he would do this. And as we've established, it wasn't due to the rail strike. But he had cried wolf so many times and said, oh, this is the horrible government, but I'm going to vote for you. The last Léger poll taken before the agreement was signed in March 2022 had the New Democrats at 22%. The latest Léger poll released last week has them at 15%. I would argue that politically, the deal has damaged the NDP's fortunes with voters.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, that Léger poll, and I think the Léger folks would acknowledge that it could be an outlier. 15% is the lowest they've polled in quite some time in any polling firm. Nanos had them at 20% in their latest poll, which came out after the Léger. So, but they are hovering between 15 and 20% since the deal was signed. So I don't think they've lost any support, but I don't think they've gained any support. And the ideal scenario for the NDP was, we will move forward. People will like our policies. They'll decide that the messenger, i.e. the prime minister, is the wrong guy. And therefore, because they like these policies, they'll turn to us. They have not. And this is the problem, because the people who are tired of Trudeau decided to go with the Conservatives. I don't think these people are coming back. And so now the hope for the NDP is to establish itself as a strong opposition, not to the Liberals, to the Conservatives. So they're hoping to somehow leap in second place and then cannibalize somehow the remaining Liberal voters to come over their side to face Pierre Poilievre. It's a big gamble because right now you're doing that from the third place position.
Although Justin Trudeau did that in 2015, much to your chagrin, you were on that campaign.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, it's possible because it's been done, and so, but that's the game plan, and that's why you could hear Jagmeet Singh basically in every response to every question during that press conference to say, you have a choice to make. There will be a choice in the next election. It will be between the Conservative who are siding with the big corporation who are ripping you off, and the NDP who want to face up to corporate greed and put more money in your pockets. That's the binary combination that Jagmeet Singh is offering to Canadians, trying to describe the Liberals as weak and trying to marginalize them. Will they be able to succeed? I don't know, but certainly it seems like that's the game plan.
Okay, I'd like to get deeper into that, but let me ask you about this. I'm going to put a scenario out, and people will think I'm crazy because I don't think anybody believes the Liberals can come back right now. Just look, Jeremy Broadhurst, their national campaign director, a well-respected guy around the Hill, political pro, he's just left because he doesn't think they can win. But imagine this scenario. They don't prorogue, which the rumor around Ottawa is they might invoke prorogation.
I think that would be a good idea, actually.
So, then the House would not come back on September 16th. But if the House came back on September 16th, Pierre Poilievre says, I'm going to put forward a non-confidence vote as soon as I can. That likely would see, within the first 2 weeks, there would be an opposition day. That would see potentially a vote before the Americans go to the polls. And I actually think that could be in Justin Trudeau's favor, because his only hope is, like Princess Leia said, Obi-Wan Kenobi, your only hope. Justin Trudeau's looking south of the border and saying, Donald Trump, you're my only hope. So if we're voting before the Americans, he would just campaign for 37 days against Donald Trump and try and scare every New Democrat voter and some who now say they'll back the Conservatives to come into the warm embrace of the Liberal fold, and maybe squeaks out another 32% of the popular vote win.
A couple of things about that. I don't think the election of Donald Trump is the Liberals' only hope, but it certainly would be helpful to them, for sure. Because the scenario you laid out is absolutely right. They would campaign against Donald Trump and associate Pierre Poilievre to Donald Trump, and they've already started doing that, even though Trump is not in office yet. You've seen some Liberals mention Donald Trump regularly in comparison to Pierre Poilievre and his team. But I want to talk about Justin Trudeau's capacity to come back from behind, because he's done it not once, not twice, but in 3 consecutive elections. He was trailing in the polls, and he ended up prime minister. And so we may want to underestimate him, but he's done it. Now, of course, he didn't have the baggage that he has now and the fatigue of being in power. But it's not like Canadians are enamored with Pierre Poilievre. When you look at his personal numbers, they're not that great. And he's kind of winning by default. And I think that's partly why the NDP did what it did, because they think that Pierre Poilievre is winning by default. And so they want to rise up and as being something different than the Liberals and try to convince people that they are a true alternative for government. And they could not do that as long as they were in that deal with the Trudeau government.
So you've been part of the campaign team that delivered the best result the federal NDP have ever had. And I want to talk about that experience and how it can be applied to Singh when we come back. More after this.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit Shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
Karl, I still remember your NDP team coming into the old offices of Sun News Network and TVA in the Quebecor days in Ottawa. You were doing a dog and pony show for all the big networks, trying to say, this is why you should cover the NDP. Because there have been times in past elections where media outlets would say, oh, well, election campaigns are really expensive. And, we can't afford to have somebody on all the planes and all the buses. And you guys went around to all the big newspapers, all the big TV networks, and you said, here's why you need to be on our plane. And it worked. We sent a reporter on your plane, I believe, for the duration of the campaign. But in that meeting, you guys laid out a very clear strategy as part of your sales pitch to the media. You said, here's what's going to happen in the campaign, and here's what we're going to do. And you didn't give out, intricate detail, but enough that you said, we're going to slice from the Liberals and slice from the Conservatives, and here's where we're going to win, and here's why you should pay attention. That was a very well-planned campaign. A lot of good people like yourself, Brad Levine, Kathleen Monk, all working on that. Does Jagmeet have a team like that around him now that can pull off the same sort of thing that you guys did in 2011?
It's an interesting comparison, and the answer is maybe. There's some people that were there in 2011 that are there now. Anne McGrath comes to mind. So she's been around, and she played a key role in 2011. And there's some new people who have not, been able to do what we did in 2011, and certainly maybe not have the same kind of experience. But there are some conditions that are a little similar to what happened in 2011. And you didn't mention the Bloc. And during that dog and pony show, as he called it, we did say at the time that we had our sights on half a dozen seats in Quebec. We were saying we will make some gains at the expense of the Bloc, and we will win half a dozen seats, which was met by mockery and laughter most of the time. but proved that we were underestimating ourselves. But the game plan was clear, and we were able to pull that off. And there was one thing that happened. It happened a few years prior. It was when we ran Tom Mulcair in a by-election in Outremont in 2007. And he was the first NDP MP elected in Quebec since Phil Edmonston in a by-election in 1990. And he became the tête de pont for the NDP. It took a few years, but he became made immediately the NDP a factor in Quebec. There's a by-election coming up in La Salle-et-Marne, Verdun right now. The NDP is running a very popular city councillor, Craig Sauvé. He doesn't have the stature of Tom Mulcair, but I think the Democrats are hoping that making that gain in Quebec could establish them again as a potential winner in Quebec and across the country.
And like Mulcair, Craig Sauvé is a guy who straddles the English and the French communities.
Absolutely. He's running in a riding that is a liberal stronghold, like Tom Mulcair did in Outremont, but he's able to push both into the Liberal and the Bloc support, which makes it a very interesting race. So that's kind of the background for everything that happened this week with Jagmeet Singh pulling out of the agreement, because it feels like the NDP needed that contrast now to win that seat and keep the seat in Elmwood-Transcona in Winnipeg. Because if you are able to win seats, you can demonstrate that you can win seats elsewhere. And that's the one comparison I would make with 2011, is that if they are able to win that Quebec seats, perhaps they've shown Canadians that they are back into serious contention. And that's key for the electorate, because you never vote for the also ran.
So let me ask, though. I mean, Jack Layton was a popular leader. I'm not sure that Jagmeet Singh is right now. And it's not just the polling. A reader out in Winnipeg sent me the campaign literature that's being dropped off, the Conservative campaign literature, and the Conservatives, they're downplaying expectations in there, but they desperately would love to win that seat back. They've held it. In fact, it's a very swingy riding. Elmwood-Transcona has been held by all three parties in the last 20 years. So they'd like to win it, but the NDP literature, the conservative literature has Pierre Poilievre all over it, along with the local candidate. But the NDP literature features Daniel Blakey. It features Wab Kinew. It does not mention or show a photo of Jagmeet Singh. That's normally a sign of, parties like to play up their leader.
Yeah, and nobody would argue that Jagmeet Singh is Jack Layton. I don't think he would make that comparison himself. I think he's quite aware of the differences, and the personalities are different, and the way that the political landscape evolved, is also very different. But it is certainly a sign that he's not necessarily seen as an asset across the country. And so they're going to need to work on that because for better or for worse in this country, even though we have 338 ridings and thousands of candidates, most people vote for the leader in the party. And that's a big challenge for the NDP. And I think they're gambling that by showing strength in pulling out of that agreement and standing up to the Conservative and describing the Liberals as weak, will be able to lift Singh up and make him a better, more liked leader. What's interesting in Transcona, I just want to make sure that for the record, in the 11 elections that happened, the 11 last elections that happened, the NDP won that seat and the Conservative ran second, except once in 2011.
Oh, I thought the Liberals had held it at one point as well.
Not for the past 11 election. Like since Bill Blakey won it, actually since the riding was created after a redistribution, the Liberals have been distant third place. They're not a factor in that riding. So when we were talking earlier about that blue-orange switch voter, that's the kind of swing riding we're talking about. So the NDP must retain that seat. If they lose to the Conservative, their narrative that they are standing up to the Conservatives, that they can defeat Conservatives, will fall apart. So that I think that's one of the reasons why the decision was made to pull the plug on the deal with the Liberals, because it was hurting them in Elmwood-Transcona, and they cannot afford to lose an NDP stronghold like that.
Well, if they win in LaSalle et Marge-Verdun and then lose Elmwood-Transcona, that would effectively take all of the wind out of the sails of winning the Montreal riding.
It certainly would dampen the expectation. Yeah.
There would be a hooray and then a crying fit.
Because the Blakey family has held that riding, forever. Except for a couple of elections where Jim Malloway was the MP there, but Bill Blakey was there for the longest time. Then Daniel Blakey came around, and so it's a key riding for the NDP. If they lose that to the Conservatives, it's a big problem for them.
Let's just stick with Jagmeet Singh, and is he the right fit for the party? Someone described him to me as Holt Renfrew Jagmeet, and Holt Renfrew and the NDP don't go well together. Does he match the tenor of the party, or the voting pool that the party's trying to get with the Rolexes and the suits and the expensive cars and all of that?
Well, I mean, New Democrats certainly seem to think so. The confidence vote at the last convention was quite decisive, quite good for Jagmeet Singh. But this is his last kick at the can. Like, he needs to make significant gain this time around. So I think that's partly why too they decided to pull the plug on that deal, because he has to go all in now. He has to go for broke. And so this is why I was saying earlier in the show that this was a decision made purely for political reason, and that's part of the political calculation. And Jagmeet Singh knows that he will not have a fifth election to run on. Like usually leaders last 2 elections. He's lasted 4. Some have argued, and I've been one of them, that perhaps he should not have ran for more than 2 elections. But
well, I'm still puzzled why Tom Mulcair was thrown out after delivering the second best result for the federal NDP.
Exactly, right? And it goes down to expectations. There was a lot of expectations in Tom Mulcair to deliver the New Jerusalem to the New Democrats and to form the first NDP government on the heels of Jack Layton's performance in 2011. It didn't happen, and despite the fact that it was the second best results in the history of the CCF-NDP. He was kicked out of the leadership position. Jagmeet Singh got more leeway because nobody expected him to win. But this time around, you have to show some growth.
So they're positioning themselves as the alternative.
Yeah.
Is there a chance for the NDP, and I want a realistic, not Karl Bélanger, the New Democrat, but Karl Bélanger, the political pundit, look at the ground right now, and is there a chance for the New Democrats to step over the Liberals in the next election? I know they're going to say that they're in it to win it. I don't see them being in a position to win the election yet, but there's, depending on when it happens, could be a while, things may change. But at this point, I would say there is the potential to at least step over the Liberals and replace them again, like you did in 2011, and make the Liberals the third party.
The key for that to happen is Ontario. And because I think in BC and Western provinces, I think the Liberals have lost too much ground, and the NDP will beat them. The Conservatives will win a lot of seats, obviously, probably the most seats, but the NDP will probably come in a strong second in the BC and the three prairie provinces. Quebec, we'll see what happens in La Salle-Mort-Verdun in a couple of weeks. The Maritimes, the NDP has never been able to really grow from the breakthrough that Alexa McDonough had in 1997 by winning in seats in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. So the key is Ontario. And in Ontario, the Liberals remain strong, especially in downtown Toronto. They are very strong. Can the NDP break through in downtown Toronto? That's where Jack Layton and Olivia Chow were from, and they elected Andrew Cash. They elected a bunch of MPs in Toronto, even in the 905 under Jack Layton in 2011. And that's when the NDP was able to supplant the Liberals, is because the Liberal vote collapsed in Ontario. Can this happen again? I'm not sure. It's possible because it's happened in the past, and Jagmeet Singh has had some success himself in Ontario. But if you look at what's happening on the provincial scene, where the Ontario Liberals, even though they are the third party and they don't have official status at Queen's Park, they are still neck and neck with the NDP for second place. And so you need the NDP to step up in Ontario for the scenario that you mentioned to unfold.
Realistic shot at them winning the next election?
It's a long shot. It's a very long shot. I wouldn't put too much money on it. But of course, we've seen weird things happen in campaigns. We've seen things. Nobody predicted that Justin Trudeau would be Prime Minister at the beginning of the 2015 campaign. It seemed to be a race between Stephen Harper and Tom Mulcair, and he came from behind and won it all. So it's happened then, could happen again. The thing about the electorate and the voters right now, they are not loyal the way they used to be. They change their mind very quickly. They do not care about great-grandpa who voted Liberal and grandpa who voted Liberal and so on and so forth. The end doesn't come out from the tomb to mark that ballot like we used to see. People do not care. They're not. The party membership are down. Fundraising is not what it was once, and so they can change their mind very quickly. And that's why you've seen these spectacular shifts during campaigns over the past decades.
It was September 15th, I believe, was the date that everything changed for you guys being out in front in the 2015 campaign and Trudeau taking over. It was mid-September. So, that was more than halfway through the campaign when that happened.
Yeah, it was a very long campaign, but you're right. It was a few days after Labor Day, mid-September, that everything shifted. Because before that, the NDP was either ahead or right behind the Conservatives. But the Liberals were crawling back, and a lot of things happened. But then the thing at the time in 2015 that is not there now is that the government in power was Stephen Harper, and the fatigue was on the Conservative. And so I think the Conservative knew that for them to win, they needed to have the NDP and the Liberals remain relatively stable. They could not afford one of them to take over. And this is what happened, because we and the Liberals knew that either we would form government or the Liberals would form government because Canadians were tired of Harper. And so the Liberals ended up winning the day. In the current scenario, I think the fact that the fatigue is on Trudeau and the Liberals is creating a different set of conditions, which the Conservatives are benefiting from right now, despite the misgivings that some people might have in Pierre Poilievre's personally. They are seen as the government in waiting, and unless the NEP can somehow step up its game and showcase how they would govern differently than the Liberals, and create that contrast with the Liberals, the path to power for the NEP is tenuous. The Liberals, however, they have to deal with that fatigue. They have to deal with the speculation about Justin Trudeau's future. It's coming every other week, every other month. There's always a scenario about, is he going to go? Is he going to walk off? Is he going to take that famous walk in the snow like his father did? And those are not helpful for the Liberals because people like to have some stability, and all these questions are not helping the Liberal cause for sure.
Instability, uncertainty. That's what we've got from this. You worked through several minority governments. I covered several minority governments. People are saying to me, the Jagmeet pulling out of this is a nothing burger. It won't change anything. I said, yeah, it might. We just don't know. Explain for listeners, what is it like in an uncertain environment of a minority government where things could literally fall at any moment?
Well, it could fall because you can't count in the in the House.
That's happened.
It's happened in the past. You don't know how many MPs are showing up for a vote, and all of a sudden we're off to the polls. So it creates a very, as a party staffer, as a political staffer, being on Parliament Hill during those moments where you don't know what's going to happen from one moment to the next is very exhilarating, because everything that you do can matter. Everything that you say can matter. It can sway something. And there's always unforeseen events, right? Like, remember when Belinda Stronach came out of nowhere to cross the floor to the Liberals? Nobody expected that.
There was the non-confidence vote that passed that Paul Martin just ignored because he said it wasn't done properly.
It wasn't done properly.
It was a vote of non-confidence, and he just chose to ignore it. And kept governing for several more months. So
it's always it's always unpredictable in this situation, and this is why. If the Conservatives are serious in trying to bring down the government, they need to move forward with a motion that is very simple and very clear, that this House has lost confidence in the government. If they talk about the carbon tax or some other nonsense that they can pull from their policy or their ideology, they will give an out to the NEP and or the Bloc Québécois. So if you're serious, you keep it simple. If you're not serious, if you just want to use it to bolster your case, then you're gonna have a series of these kind of situation brinksmanship, which will be interesting, but won't amount to anything until it does.
But I think in that scenario, Pierre Poilievre wins either way. I agree. He should do a very simple. Exactly what you said, that this House has lost confidence in the government. That's it.
Yeah.
But if the other parties don't vote with him to bring down the government, he wins because he gets to attack them for supporting Justin Trudeau's Liberals, least most unpopular government in forever. And if they vote with him, well, he gets the election that he wants. So he's got a win-win scenario here.
Yeah. So it depends what the objective is, right? Because you're right that he will be able to see what I said about the NDP, Liberal, costly coalition who love the carbon tax. I was right. But people don't vote if there's no election. And so, at some point, everything that goes up will come down. Is it possible that the Poilievre Conservatives peak too soon? It is possible. We've seen it happen in the past where a party is leading ahead of the election, and then been leading for too long, and suddenly in the campaign it fizzles. So that's the calculus that the Conservatives have to make. When do we want that election? Do we want it now, or do we want to keep playing with the Liberals and the NEP for some time? Because if they want to keep playing, it's in their power. But if they want to bring down the government, they need to put that to the test with a very simple motion. And then if the NDP prop up the Liberals and get nothing in return, they still win, because they can even point out that the NDP was not serious by pulling out of the agreement, and that for all effect, the coalition is still in place.
I want to ask you about the pension issue with Jagmeet. Because for years I've been hearing people say, well, he just won't vote them down because he wants to get his pension. And for a long time, I was dismissive of that because I thought, no, people are around and do things for greater reasons than that. And then one day I called up the Taxpayers Federation, and every time an MP retires, they've got an estimate of what their pension is. So I said, you guys do that. What would Jagmeet's pension be if he just got the 6 years? And they said, I believe the estimate was $2.2 or $2.3 million over the course of his lifetime. And I said, well, that's a lot of money for anybody not to, to give up. Do you think that plays a factor in any of this?
Frankly, I don't think so. I mean, if you want to talk about the pension, I guess it's easy for Pierre Poilievre to make that accusation because his pension is secured. It's going to be much bigger.
At age 31.
Yeah, it's going to be much bigger than Jagmeet Singh. So, of course, it's easy to say, oh, he's doing it for the pension when your pension is secured. But I don't think it's part of the calculation, frankly. I think it was part of the Liberals' calculation when they changed the election date, however. I certainly think it was. When they moved to
October 25th.
Exactly, because then a bunch of MPs, including Liberals, New Democrats, and I think some Conservatives and some Blocists too, will get their pension. I think that was part of the calculation. But for Jagmeet Singh at this time, I don't think I don't think he believes he will lose his seat.
So he'll get it anyway.
That's exactly it.
Okay. So final question, $64,000 question. When will the election be?
I don't think it will be this fall. I don't think it will be this fall for one of many reasons, but the following one is really important. There's a series of provincial elections happening this fall, including in British Columbia, where the NDP is in power right now. And if anybody knows anything about New Democrats, is that there's a lot of resources sharing. There's a lot of human resources sharing. There's a lot of the same election workers working from one part of the country to the other. So if there's a federal election happening at the same time as one or two provincial elections, it creates a problem for the NDP machine. So I think they will want to wait. If there's a window that really opens up, I think it's the next federal budget when the Liberals don't deliver on XYZ demand that the NDP will make. Of course, the Liberals will not negotiate in good faith with the NDP because they cannot trust them anymore.
It'll be interesting times, Karl. Thanks so much for your time today and so many of your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Full Comment is a post-media podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Proulx with theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. Remember, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts and YouTube Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Help us out by giving us a rating, leaving a review, and tell your friends about us. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.